Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you like the weather that San Francisco turned out for you?
Yes.
Oh, God. It's so lovely to see all these shining faces. Hi, everybody. I want to thank Open Source for having me here today. Let's give them a hand. Amazing. Oh, hi. Okay. I'm going to have to refer to some notes here. I want you to know that I'm going to say some numbers up here on stage. And one of the rules of my channel is that if I'm saying numbers, I'm wrong. So just know that while my numbers might be spongy, my rhetoric is sound, in my opinion. Secondly, we are living in a fact-challenged world right now. And many of us in the engineering and the sciences retreat to the comfort of numbers and the comfort of weights and measures, the things that are unassailable, the things that we can all agree on. And this is a talk about my finding comfort in finer and finer increments of precision. So about 3 years ago, sorry, I want to say one other thing. I had a really, really amazing time at the party on Friday night, and every single person I spoke to who told me that Mythbusters and the work of me and my colleagues got them interested in the science, I cannot tell you how much I and we all appreciate hearing that. It's so mind-blowing. Also, I wonder what you burned down. So just a blanket apology to everyone's parents. About 3 years ago, I lost a friend and colleague, and trying to process the grief of losing someone so close, I retreated to the comfort of numbers. I decided to make myself something I had always wanted that I didn't think I was capable of making, and this is Hellboy's sidearm, the Samaritan. It's a gigantic revolver. They made the originals at Weta Workshop for the original film directed by Guillermo del Toro, and I've held the original one, and I wanted one. But this is a surpassingly difficult engineering challenge, building something mechanical with multiple parts that all have to fit together for it to work. This was a task that I was not good enough to complete when I started it, but that actually is kind of the way I approach many of my builds. I got good enough to finish it over 220 some odd hours of refining the increments in my shop. And it's a beautiful feeling getting to know my machines to a degree that even though I've got a digital readout measurement system that goes to a 10,000th, I still know on which side of about 1,000th my machine falls. I know how to adjust my lathe to get the exact measurement, to get that needle to drop at zero. And the better I got at that, the more I felt that deep connection to the machines. But also, I felt a connection to makers going deep into the past. I mean, I think one of the things that's so beautiful about making, and again, I'm just going to give my definition of making, it is this broad. Whenever you reach out into the world and make something that didn't exist, you are a maker. What a beautiful sound. This is me blowing my nose in the morning. So, dialing into the precision makes me feel connected to makers going back to the origins of humanity. I now feel a connection to the stone tools I see them digging up that are ever and ever farther in the past. I think the most recent one I read about was like a 168,000-year-old axe. And I, at this age, start to feel a connection to that maker. And that's beautiful. And I also start looking at watches and things that we've been making for hundreds of years, and I start wondering how we got here. How did we become so precise? How do we make things so well? Now, before I continue, I want to give you a bit of a dive into the numbers that I'm talking about. So I'm going to start with about 4/1000ths of an inch, or the thickness of a standard piece of copy paper. You can picture holding a piece of paper in your hand. You're feeling the difference of about 4/1000ths of an inch. If it's a cigarette paper, For those of you who might roll cigarettes or other things, that's about 1,000th of an inch. Cigarette paper is very reliably 20 to 25 microns, or about a 1,000th of an inch. Now, when we go below that, I said a 1,000th of an inch is 25 some odd microns. A micron is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. It's 1,000th of a millimeter. Now, submicron, we get to nanometer, which is 1,000th of a micron. And then we're going to go really deep, and I'll tell you that a proton is hold on. Where is it? A proton is 1/1,000,000th of a micron. Right, so a micron is 1/25th of a 1,000th of an inch. A proton is 1/1,000,000th of that. Okay, so I'm talking about watches. I'm looking at watches from the 19th century, and I'm wondering how these companies made things at such a fine grade of precision, using equipment that is less advanced than what I have in my shop right now. And when I started to look at that, I learned that starting in the early 16th century, like 1700, people around the world realized that we needed to codify our measurement system. And so the metric system comes out of that, and it changes over the years. England has one metric system, France has another, America has their own thing. And by the way, I want to stop right here and say, I'm really tired on my channel of getting people giving me crap about using standard imperial measurements. It's the Mac versus PC boring ass debate. It's whatever works for you. And I would love to use the metric system because it's objectively better, but that's not what I was trained on. That being said, I learned that there was this process whereby there wasn't really an agreement about what measurements were. So one shop might have their definition of an inch, and another shop might have another definition of an inch. Now the governments, England, France, America, and others, were actually trying to come to those standards. France had a kilogram made of platinum in 2 vacuum chambers for a couple of 100 years until we decided to change our basis of what the metric system is based on. But so they had this kilogram in a vault. England, I was at the Royal Society last October, and they brought out an 1847 meter, a yard from 1847. It's a piece of brass made to incredible precision. This is what Britain said, this is a yard in 1847. But how does that measurement get to anybody who needs to use it? So this is where I want to introduce you to an important and amazing engineering genius named Carl Edvard Johansson. Those of you who know about Carl Edvard Johansson are probably nodding your heads. If you don't, here's the thing. It is such a shame that such a piece of shit like Henry Ford has so many words spilled on him and we don't know the name of Carl Edvard Johansson. Because Carl looked up in 1890 and saw this problem and saw a way to potentially solve it. What he did was he invented a thing called gauge blocks. And what he understood, when I was talking about finer and finer increments of measurement, the fact is that when you are dialing in highly precise equipment, your measuring tools are only really reliable to about 1,000th of an inch, and some measuring tools can get you to a micron, but really past 1,000th of an inch, we stop measuring and we start comparing. So instead of using the dial calipers to measure sub-1,000th measurements, we actually build a reference standard and we compare. And that's a far more reliable way. It bypasses the degradation of equipment. And so this comparison is the system that Carl Edvard Johansson built. They're called gauge blocks. There's about 100 of them. And with them, you can assemble any measurement from like about 50 thousandths to about 4,000 thousandths, or 4 inches. And the first gauge blocks were made by Carl and his wife in their kitchen. So these are little tiny things. I'm going to pull, I actually brought a couple to show you. And in order to use these, they had to be incredibly flat. So these are gauge blocks. These are gauge blocks that were gifted to me by Mitutoyo. They are part of a ceramic gauge block system. There's 100 of these in that system, and the box of them costs about $5,000.
Wow.
And it's because of the precision of the flatness on the sides of the block, on the sides of the blocks. This is a 3-inch, yeah, that's a 3-inch and that's a 1-inch. And they are measured from side to side. Sorry, I got a little tremor because I'm so excited. They are so flat across these planes. How flat are they? They are so flat that if this inch was the length of Manhattan Island, 22 miles long, the total variance up and down would be less than 1 inch.
Wow.
And so the way you do this, the way you actually get things that flat is, well, again, it goes back to the origins of precision. If you want a really flat surface, you need 3 blocks, A, B, and C. You rub A to B, and then B to C, and then C to A. And if you keep doing that, you keep following that, A to B, B to C, C to A, there's only one shape that is consistent that comes out of that exercise, and it is a perfectly flat surface. And the degree of flatness is only dictated by the degree of your rubbing compound. And so Carl and his wife are sitting there in his kitchen, lapping these flat gauge blocks for weeks. The first sets cost like $20,000 in 1890 money, right? These were a fortune. And it actually turns out that it was Henry Ford that realized the utility of gauge blocks, bought Carl Edvard Johansson's patent, and actually made them universally available. So that's a good thing Henry Ford did. We'll give him that one. And then, so again, just to reiterate, the way gauge blocks works is if I wanted a 4-inch measurement, well, I might grab a 4-inch gauge block, but let's say I don't have one. I take the 4-inch, the 3-inch and the 1-inch, and I put them together, and that gives me this reference standard. Oh, this is the other thing that Johansson did. He went to the governments and measured his gauge blocks off the government's standard. Therefore, his gauge blocks were what they called traceable to the original standard. That's what traceability means. It means there's a lineage from the real thing to you. And this allows shops to actually cross-compare. It allows one watch shop to make a gear that they say is 0.7539 inches wide or in diameter, and another shop to make a piece that fits it exactly. And only something like gauge blocks will engender that sort of precision. Okay, hold on, I gotta check my notes. Okay, so I'll just keep this with me. So when you are stacking gauge blocks, you don't just stack them willy-nilly, you don't just do that. And the reason you don't is because you could do that 5 times and measure it, and you'd have 5 different measurements. If you want a consistent measurement every time you're stacking gauge blocks, you have to put them together in a process called wringing, W-R-I-N-G-I-N-G. Now I can actually see that I'm barreling through this talk, so I might actually have time for Q&A afterwards. So wringing works like this. You join 2 clean blocks together at a 90-degree angle, and you push them and you turn them, and they stay.
Wow.
Now, here's my favorite part about this. We don't know why these stick together. Seriously, you want to go figure something out? Figure this out. It could be van der Waals forces. It could be the weak magnetic force. It could be that the 2 planes of molecules are close enough that gravity actually has something to do with it. It could be suction. It's not magnetism. These are ceramic. Yeah, and like with super clean blocks, the actual amount of pull together is significant. So the wringing gauge, I love this. It's like a magic trick. The first time I did it, you can actually find videos of Carl Edvard Johansson stacking like 20 of these things.
Wow.
I tried that once. It's on my channel. You can see me drop gauge blocks into each other. So then I found out, because I'm a completist and I can't stop searching about things that I'm interested in, I started looking up Carl Edvard Johansson. Hold on, I'm going to put these back before I drop them. I start looking up Carl Edvard Johansson, and I learned that he, in addition to making gauge blocks, and you can still buy these on eBay. You can still buy Carl Edvard Johansson Ford-made gauge blocks. You can also buy Carl Edvard Johansson meters. So I bought a 1-micron indicator made by Carl's original company. It says CEJ on the stamping. It's beautiful. And I got it from eBay, and I think I got it on a Saturday, but I was so excited I went into the cave and I started a video. And I'm a long-time storyteller. I love nothing more than a narrative arc. I want to give you an act structure, 3 acts. I want a 2 to 3 act turn. I want an exciting rhetorical finish. But I opened this video and said, look, I'm just opening something I got in the mail. This video will not have any kind of rhetorical arc. It's just me showing you something. So I break out Carl's gauge, and I break out 2 sets of gauge blocks. I have a steel and a ceramic set. And I start showing how gauge blocks work. And so I take a 1-inch gauge block from the steel set and I put it under. And then I remove it and I take a 1-inch gauge block from the ceramic set and I put it under, and you can see they fall at the exact same line. And then an idea occurs to me on camera, and I pull the steel block out after measuring it to 0, and I held it in my hand for 15 seconds without cutting the shot, and then I put it back under the gauge. I'm getting goosebumps as I tell you this, because that gauge read 1 micron bigger. That the body heat that I imparted in 15 seconds to this 1-inch piece of steel, the other block, not this one, made it increase in size by 1 micron. The YouTube comments are packed with physicists doing the math and being like, yeah, that checks out. I read books about the Golden Gate Bridge when I was a teenager. I've always loved the engineering marvel that is here in our hometown. And I've long known that the 7,600 foot long cables that hold that bridge up are not exactly 7,600 feet long. In fact, they're 15 feet longer in the middle of the day than they are at night. That's the coefficient of expansion of those steel cables. They are 15 feet longer in the middle of the day than they are at night. Now, where was I going with this? This is the thing where I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. I realized that at high levels of precision, we stop measuring and start comparing because we can't measure at that level of precision. As I was looking at my gauge blocks and I was researching their origins to tell you this story, I noticed my gauge blocks had calibration charts in them, which listed every single block in the set, and plus or minus, and I realized these were telling me exactly how over and under spec they were, by nanometers. Again, a millionth of a meter. And then I saw down in the lower right-hand corner, all of these measurements are certified at 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius. And then I realized, right, so I put the gauge block in my hand for 15 seconds. That's no longer 20 degrees Celsius. It's something different, slightly warmer, and that's a micron's difference. That's a real significant, from an engineering standpoint, that's a big difference. I start, in my comments on this video, people start to talk about shops they work in where a human couldn't be in the room for measurement because their body heat would change it. It turns out that at high levels of precision, we stop measuring and start comparing, not because that's better. It's because that's the only way we can actually understand things at that level. You cannot measure them. You can only compare them. So when you hear that I'll tell that fact later. It turns out that what I thought was the most unassailable set of facts in the world, how long something is, how big it is, how far away it is, are still these fungible numbers that are based on a system that we agreed upon how to measure those parameters. So what Carl Edvard Johansson did was not come up with a better system for measurement. He came up with a better system for collaborating on measurement, for concluding things together. That means there's no such thing as a measurement. That means measurements don't really exist. They only exist when we give them parameters like temperature and time and what the material is and where we are. And I felt the ground shift beneath my feet in a really beautiful way, because it means that it's collaboration that's the key to that kind of precision. And despite the fact that it's as loosey-goosey as all of us agreeing that 20 degrees Celsius is the temperature at which we're going to come to these agreements, the James Webb Space Telescope can spend $10 billion and 30 years and hundreds of thousands of incredible person hours spent building this 16,000-pound school bus that we send out 4 times the distance of the moon to the second Lagrange point, 1,000,000 miles from Earth, where it unfurls 2 20 by 15 meter, actually it unfurls like a dozen 20 by 15 meter shrouds to hide itself from the sun. Once it got to that Lagrange point, it had to implement over 500 separate processes that if any single one of those had failed, the entire project would have gone into the trash. And that telescope got to where it was going, exceeded its operational specs, and is not only showing us the deepest recesses of the universe, but the deepest recesses of time. And that's all because humans have come around to start to agree. There's a beautiful, beautiful YouTube channel I love called Numberphile, which is a bunch of charming British mathematicians talking about. My wife has actually tapped me on the shoulder while I'm watching Numberphile and asked me, "Are you crying about geometry?" I'm like, "Yes, geometry's really beautiful." And one of the first videos that got me into them was they were talking about a number so large that if you could conceive of the number, your head would collapse into a black hole. That's not a metaphor. If you could hold the information of this number in your head, there's more information in that number than there is in a black hole the size of your head. Literally, your head would collapse into a black hole. I love this fact. Because it really what I'm getting around to is the fact that, hold on, I wrote this down, I think it was good. Is that what's required is not that we build a precise system for measurement, but a precise system for collaboration. And that makes me excited about the future. Thank you guys so much for your time.